The proportional head control allows power wheelchair users to control their wheelchair functions by movements of the head. It is intended for adult and pediatric power wheelchair users with little extremity control, but with good head control. Each pad can be individually adjusted to the specific head positioning zones for better control, comfort, and function. We have 3 ready-made packages available, so you can easily pick the best option for each user. The Head Control Omni Proportional Long Package consists of a Head Control Center Unit Omni with integrated sub-D9 cable. This consists of an onboard configurator and a central pad that can be placed at the occipital or sub-occipital area. 2 head control side units with long mounting rods holding the lateral pads that can be placed on the parietal area of the user's skull, clearing the ears and glasses of the user. The Head Control Omni Proportional Short Package is very similar to the previous package. It also consists of the center unit with sub-D9 cable, onboard configurator, and a central pad. The difference is that the lateral pads are attached to short mounting rods. If you prefer switches over lateral pads, you can opt for the Head Control Omni Switched package, which consists of the Head Control Center Unit Omni with integrated sub-D9 cable, onboard configurator, and a central pad, 2 head control mounting set side units, and 2 Twister Pro black head control sets. We offer 3 different parts to mount the head control onto a bracket. Make sure you have the right one for your installation. The Head Control Set Body Link Joint for mounting on a Permobil body link bracket. The Head Control Set 25.4mm ball joint for mounting on a 1-inch ball. And the Head Control Set 17mm ball joint for mounting on a 17mm ball, or the Unilink fixed head hardware bracket. If you don't have a mounting bracket, you can order along the Unilink fixed head hardware bracket. It will then be shipped together with your chosen package. In addition to the essential or standard components, we also offer several optional add-ons. To add additional satellites to the setup, you can use the Head Control Satellite Mounting Set. It's basically an extra arm that lets you mount a sip and puff or a switch like the Twister on Bended Tube or the Twister Pro. In this last case, you can also use 2 other add-ons. The Twister Pro Head Control Set for mounting on the MO1115 or the Twister Pro Quick to Mount Set for mounting on the MO1110. More information on how to install extra satellites can be found in the manual of the specific product. In this video, you will get all the instructions on how to mount the head control onto the wheelchair, how to connect them physically, and how to configure them in the software. We will also show you how to operate the wheelchair with the head control and how to configure the correct parameters in the mo-vis software. While unpacking the different items, always check whether the device isn't damaged and verify that all parts are included. Set up a personalized installation plan based on the user's needs and capabilities. Consider where every part of the device should be placed and how the device will be operated in a robust and reliable positioning. Hard or sudden movements of the wheelchair may not disorganize the installation. The device has already been roughly assembled, but it still needs to be tightened and adjusted to the needs of the end user. You can now mount the head control onto the wheelchair using the correct combination of bracket and adapter, as explained earlier in the video. Always use the correct Allen wrench and apply the proper amount of force to tighten the screws safely and correctly. The side units are mounted on top of the center unit by default. However, they can also be mounted on the bottom if that is more suitable for the end user. In both cases, torque the screws, securing the side units to the center unit to 3 Newton meters. The side units each include a joint assembly, which allows for 3 different positions. By moving this part, you can create a more narrow or a wider setup of the head control. Find the optimal setup and torque the 2 outer screws that secure this part to 2.5 Newton meters. When you release the wing nut on the outer side of the joint assembly, you can change the angle of the rod. In that way, you can move the joint and side pad or satellite more to the center or to the side. Find the optimal setup and tighten the wing nut firmly. By sliding the joint over the rod, you can bring the side pad or satellite more to the front or back of the head. The movement of this part is limited by an adjustable end stop on the bottom of the joint. If the rod sticks out too far on the back side of the head control, the rod can be cut shorter with a hacksaw. Find the optimal setup and torque the middle screw for fixating the end stop to 2.5 Newton meters. You can also change the position of the side pad itself, thanks to the ball joint and the two inserts. Adjust the position as desired, but always make sure that the cutout in the triangle is aligned with the rod. Gradually torque the 3 bolts evenly to 1 Newton meter. If you are installing the Head Control Omni-Switched package with Twister Pro buttons instead of pads on the side units, gradually torque the 4 screws on the horseshoe bracket evenly. Finally, you can also add additional satellites, like a Twister Pro, twister on bended tube, or a sip and puff to the setup. If the side units are attached to the top of the center unit, you can mount the head control satellite mounting set on the bottom, or vice versa. For installing the add-ons, you can consult the specific manual of each product. A stable mounting of all parts of the head control is really important. If the device is mechanically unstable, this may lead to reduced functionality, unwanted movements, or no reaction of the wheelchair. Do a final checkup to make sure that everything is tightly secured and no objects or body parts can get stuck within the opening range of the satellites to avoid pinching. To ensure that all wheelchair functions such as driving, electric gears, and lights can be operated with the head control, it needs to be connected to the wheelchair's electronics. Therefore, plug in the 3.5mm jack connection of the center unit directly into the electronics of the wheelchair. Next, connect a remote pad, a normal open switch, or a safety switch to each side jack of the center unit. These jacks have dedicated driving functions and are therefore not configurable. You can connect any 3.5mm monojack switch, but we strongly advise you to use a mo-vis Twister Pro or another switch with resistor values to ensure driving safety. Connect the necessary switches and satellites to the head control. No matter what, put one on-off switch in the red jack and add optionally 1 or 2 satellites like a sip and puff, a button, or a pad in the yellow or green jack for programmable functions. More information on how to configure the settings will be discussed later in this video. Check whether the head control is correctly connected to the wheelchair by pressing the on-off button. If the display screen wakes up and shows either the home screen or an error code, the wheelchair is activated. Attention! Before inserting a connector, remove the protective cover from the port. If certain connections are not used, always put or keep the protective covers in. To ensure the head control signals are captured correctly, a few settings need to be configured in the software of the wheelchair. Our head control is compatible with the 3 most common systems: Curtiss-Wright, Dynamic Controls, and Curtiss Instruments. In this section, we'll show you how to set the required parameters for each of these 3 systems. First, start by connecting the wheelchair to a PC and open the familiar software. The system also needs to be configured in the mo-vis software, which we will cover later in this video. To make the connection with Curtiss-Wright, you need an Omni 2 display. Program the device as a 3-axis proportional device in the RNet programmer. Therefore, click on Omni, select Ports, and then SID. In that parameter window, choose 3-axis proportional for the appropriate port. When you have done that, an arrow of the drive direction will be displayed on the Omni display. Toggling the direction, forward and reverse, can be achieved in 3 ways: via forward and reverse auto toggle, via a single or double click on a user switch, or via a timed click on a user switch. To set up the forward and reverse auto toggle, navigate through Omni and Ports to the Controls menu. Make sure the auto toggle is switched on. and set the auto toggle time to the desired number of seconds. You can also use a switch where a single press toggles the direction, and a double press will enter the user menu or sequence of other functions. A long press activates sleep mode. In this case, make sure that the auto toggle options under Controls in the Omni Ports menu is switched off. In addition, configure the used input jack of the head control with the mode action in the mo-vis software. How to set up this parameter will be explained later in this video. The third option is to use a switch with timed click. In this case, the selected drive direction will automatically toggle when in standby, at the rate set by auto toggle time. Set the parameter double-click to 0 under switches, and make sure the forward-reverse auto toggle is switched off under Controls in the Omni Ports menu. If you want to use a Twister Pro with safety switch functionality on the head control, take the following points into account. Set the dip switches on the bottom of the Twister Pro in the correct position. The red jack on the head control has a dedicated on-off function. To use a Twister Pro with safety switch functionality, program the following in the Curtiss-Wright software. Click on Omni, select Global, and turn on the external on-off switch detect. The left and right jack on the head control have dedicated drive functions, so no need for additional configuration in the RNet, only in the head control itself. The yellow and green jack on the head control do have configurable functions. If they are used for anything other than mode, no need for additional programming in RNet, only in the head control itself. If you do use it for mode, then you have to program the following in the Curtiss-Wright software. Click on Omni, select Ports, go to Switches, and turn on 9-way SID switch detect. To make the connection with dynamic controls, you need an IN500A module. Program the device as a proportional head array in the Links Access app. Therefore, go to Modules and select IN500. In the User Input Configuration window, choose Proportional Head Array. Toggling the direction can be done using a switch and by setting a rule in the Links Access app. In the IN500 tab under Modules, scroll to the Input Pin 6, Port Settings. Under Momentary, choose Always, Drive, and Toggle Reverse. If you use the red jack of the head control in combination with the IN500, connect the pigtail of the Omni cable to the jack socket of the IN500. Next, configure it in the Links Access app. In the IN500 tab under Modules, scroll to the jack socket tip port settings and choose Power button as input type. If you want to use a Twister Pro with safety switch functionality on the head control, take the following points into account. Set the dip switches on the bottom of the Twister Pro in the correct position. Attention, the Links Band 1 and Links Band 10 require different positions, so double-check if everything is correct. The red jack on the head control has a dedicated on-off function, so the safety switch functionality is not supported in Links. However, if you use the red jack for anything else than a power button, you have to put the dip switches on the bottom of the Twister Pro in the correct position, as shown earlier. Also, choose the correct input type in the Links Access app. Navigate via Modules and IN500 to the jack socket tip port settings and choose resistor bands as input type. There you can set up band 1 or band 10. The left and right jack on the head control have dedicated drive functions, so no need for additional configuration in Links, only in the head control itself. The yellow and green jack on the head control do have configurable functions, but also no need for additional programming in Links. How to set up these parameters in the mo-vis software will be covered later in this video. To make the connection with Curtiss Instruments, you need a SCIM enhanced display. Program the device as a 3-direction proportional head in the Econ W programmer. Therefore, go to SCIM. Select Input Configuration and choose 3-direction proportional head in the drop-down menu. If you want to use the mo-vis parameter angle compensation, then choose 3-direction proportional in the drop-down menu. In that case, the forward and reverse axis need to be swapped. Toggling the direction, forward and reverse, can be done using a short nudge on the back pad or via jack command, both to be programmed in the Econ W programmer. If you want to use the toggle command, select 3-direction arrow toggle settings and input your desired time in the Toggle Command Time tab. You can also define the time using the Teach Toggle command. If you want to use the jack command, select D-sub-9 pin and set the mode short, long, or double command type on toggle via the drop-down menu. Also, configure the used input jack of the head control with the mode action in the mo-vis software. Power on device setting can't be used with a SIM display because it has no on-off jack. Use other options in the Startup Configuration menu, under the sections Input Device Selection and Default Input Device. QLogic does not support safety switches for the red on-off jack of the head control. The left and right jack on the head control have dedicated drive functions, so no need for additional configuration in the Econ W programmer, only in the head control itself. The yellow and green jack on the head control do have configurable functions, but also no need for additional programming. How to set up these parameters in the mo-vis software will be covered later in this video. The movements of the head control are translated into according movements of the wheelchair, like driving or menu navigation. The common way to operate the wheelchair with the head control is as follows. By default, pressure on the center pad leads to forward driving. Pressure on the side pads or switches gives direction, which leads to left or right driving. You can go from forward to reverse driving by pressing a button or by performing a head gesture. This needs to be programmed in the electronics of the wheelchair, the head control, or both. The specific instructions concerning this matter will follow later in the video. The speed depends on the amount of pressure applied to the pads. The harder you push, the faster the wheelchair moves. Whenever you stop the pressure, the wheelchair stops driving. The head control is now fully functional on its own, so check its operation and overall functionality. We will now explain a few ways to further adjust the head control to enhance the end user's driving experience and safety. Before adjusting any parameters, it's important to configure them according to the end user's needs and abilities to ensure a safe and reliable setup. Changes to parameter settings may cause damage to the device or wheelchair, or may result in injury. Therefore, always adjust parameters and test the outcomes with no one seated in the wheelchair. In this video, we will show you how to set up the most important parameters in the onboard configurator via the screen on the backside of the center unit. You can also connect the device to a PC and adjust the necessary settings in the mo-vis configurator software from there. You can find the instructions for this procedure in the instruction manual. To navigate through the onboard programming, use the 3 buttons on the right side of the screen. There is an up button, a down button, and a menu button in the middle. A short press on the menu button executes the action displayed in the lower left corner. In this example, it will take you back to the previous page in the menu. A long press on the menu button initiates the action displayed in the lower right corner. In this example, it will select the item Calibration. You can see how long you need to hold the button to activate the long press, as the area behind the check mark gradually fills up. The icon in the top left corner indicates the operational status of the device. This can be, for example, focus mode, configurator mode, or error mode. A detailed description of all 7 statuses can be found in the installation manual. Certain sections are locked, indicated by the lock icon next to their name, meaning that you need to enter a PIN code to access that section. By default, the PIN code is the last 3 digits of the serial number. It can be changed using the mo-vis configurator software on an external PC. Always protect this PIN code from unauthorized access. When entering the menu, you will see 3 main sub-menus. In the Information submenu, you can find the serial number, hardware and firmware versions of the device, as well as other general information. If you need support, this information is useful to access and provide to the support team. Via the Settings submenu, you can adjust the different parameters, such as the minimum and maximum force, to fully configure the device according to the end user's needs. The Calibration submenu guides you through all these parameters in a wizard-like manner. This is the easiest way to configure everything correctly, so let's go through it together, step by step. First, we need to calibrate the input jacks, green and yellow. When you insert a button directly into either of these jacks, pressing the button will lead to the action programmed under Tip. If you use a splitter cable and connect 2 buttons to one jack, then you can have different actions for the tip and the ring. The jacks are smart, meaning they can automatically detect what is connected. Follow the wizard to assign the desired type and action for each jack. The type is filled in automatically, and you only need to select the action from the drop-down menu. Here you can see that there is a normal open switch connected to the yellow jack with the mode action. 2 remote pads are connected to the left and right jack for the left and right driving function. Make sure to save the settings at the end. Next, you have the pad settings. For the left, center, and right pad, you can set the minimum and maximum force. Everything in between is the proportional driving window. In this video, we will show you how to set this up for the center pad, as the other pads can be configured in the same way. We start by setting up the minimum force. If the user wants to be able to rest the head, ask the user to simply rest on the pad. After doing that, long press the menu button to store the value. If the user wants to be able to drive with the slightest touch of the pad, you can skip this step by long pressing the menu button. The maximum force is the force at which the user wants to reach 100% speed. Ask the user to apply their maximum force on the pad, and after doing that, long press the menu button to store the value. Important to note here is that people tend to overestimate their maximum force. This maximum force is something that the user should be able to do easily and repeatably. If they have overestimated at first instance, repeat the step or adjust it manually later in the settings. Make sure to save the calibration at the end. Finally, for this basic calibration, we can set up the angle compensation, if applicable. A common issue with head controls is that you can't use them in an inclined position. This is because your head has a certain weight, and when tilting the chair, it becomes too difficult to keep your head away from the pad. That's why we added this calibration, which you only need to perform once. Ask the user to rest their head against the pad and ask an attendant to slowly recline the chair. You will see the angle increase on the screen. Once you reach the maximum tilted angle, save the calibration by long pressing the menu button. Once that calibration is done, the user can change their position to whatever angle they want, and the resting force will be compensated. The user can rest their head comfortably without the chair driving and needs to exert additional force for driving. We can do this because there is an angle sensor inside the device, and we make a reference table for each angle with the resting force. Reboot the power wheelchair in order to confirm the calibration. At this point, you can already ask the user to do a small functional test. Are the forces okay? Do the buttons function as expected? And so on. Next, we will review some settings to further personalize the device according to the user's unique needs. Navigate through the main menu to the Settings submenu. You can adjust the input jacks, but since the calibration has already been completed, this is not necessary for the default configuration. You can also go through the 3 pads to fine-tune the previously calibrated force. For example, if the user indicates that they need to press too hard to drive comfortably. For every pad, you can also set up the initial speed. The initial speed is the starting speed, which is sent to the wheelchair electronics when the head is detected. In other words, when the head is touching the pad. In a standard wheelchair electronic system, you get a deadband, which is meant for tolerances inside a joystick. This is not needed with our head control. So you don't want to lose, for example, 10% of your force range. By setting up the initial speed parameter, you can create a zero deadband system. Furthermore, depending on the load of the chair and the chair itself, sending a signal towards the motor does not necessarily result in a movement. Using this parameter, you can achieve this. The goal is giving the user the possibility to drive proportionally, even with very little force. You can put in a percentage for every individual pad. Don't forget to save by long pressing the menu button. For the center pad, you can also set up the parameter veering. Our sensor pads have the capability of detecting the force location. In this way, you can drive both forward and sideways with only the center pad. By turning your head slightly to the right or the left, you can add an X component onto your Y. For this parameter, you can enter a value between 0% and 100%. When set to 100%, the user can turn in place by moving their head to the side of the center pad. This is not the recommended setting because you need extremely good head control to drive straight without oscillating. However, if you set it to 40%, for example, you can make slight corrections without use of the side pads. This is especially useful when using a switched head control, where you don't need the switches as much for driving or during training stage of the device. Finally, for the pads, you can also configure the overload force detection. We already defined the user's dynamic range by setting a minimum and maximum force. But in case the end user has spastic movements where the muscles contract and they go into an overstretch, the pad may be activated involuntarily, causing the wheelchair to drive unintentionally and possibly hit something. To mitigate this risk, you can configure an overload threshold. This is an additional percentage above the maximum force at which the wheelchair will stop moving. If the user goes into overstretch, the applied force may exceed the overload threshold. In that case, the head control sends a zero-speed command to the electronics and the wheelchair stops. The head control warning state is automatically cleared when the user removes their head from the pad for at least 1 second. The user can then resume driving. For example, if the maximum force is 1 kilogram and the overload threshold is set to 150%, the overload protection will be activated when 1.5 kilograms of force is applied to the pad. Between 1 and 1.5 kilograms, the wheelchair will move at maximum speed. If the wheelchair is equipped with a Curtiss-Wright R-Net system, there is one final setting for this default configuration, the Omni setting. To detect an open or short circuit in the Omni cable, set this parameter to Safety Switch. For all devices, indicate whether another input module is used instead of an R-Net Omni 2 display. If this parameter is not set correctly, a slight deviation in the driving direction may occur. The head control is now fully configured for the default configuration. The next chapter discusses several common special cases. In this chapter, we will cover 3 common special cases. We will show you how to configure gestures, how to install and use a sip and puff system, and how to add a button attached to swing-away mounting hardware in the mo-vis software using the onboard configurator. Note that all configurations can also be adjusted using the mo-vis configurator on an external PC. First, let's look at gestures, which allow you to control wheelchair functions using as few satellites as possible. The on-off button is always required, but a second button can be replaced by configured gestures. There are 2 types of gestures: gestures during driving and gestures during standby. With gestures during driving, you can link a programmed function to a left-left or right-right nudge sequence. This, however, has 2 disadvantages. The user needs to perform a timed sequence, which is not always doable. There will also be a slight delay while driving when turning left or right because the system must detect whether there is a gesture performed or not. With the second type, gestures during standby, you don't have these limitations. Here you can configure a timed standby, where the head control automatically enters standby after a specified number of seconds. By default, this is set to 60 seconds. This function only works if there is a method to exit standby mode, for example via a button action or a gesture. Important: if a standby function is configured, the wheelchair will always start up in standby mode. When in standby, you can allocate a function to a nudge on each pad. Here's an example to illustrate this. A nudge to the center pad can be the exit of the standby state. A nudge to the left pad can be a mode single pulse for toggling the direction. A nudge to the right pad can be a mode double pulse for entering the menu. Clearly, these settings can only be used by people who have the cognitive ability to understand these gestures and are familiar with navigating the menu structure. There are two other parameters associated with the gestures: the nudge timer and the gesture timer. You can configure these by entering the settings submenu, selecting gestures, and then navigating to timers. The nudge timer specifies the time allowed to perform a single nudge, which is set to 1 second by default. The gesture timer defines the time allowed to complete the entire gesture. This example graph illustrates a double nudge in drive mode, with the y-axis representing the force applied to the pad and the x-axis representing time. You can observe a rise in force when pressing, the release where the first nudge is detected, followed by another activation and deactivation of the pad. These two nudges then trigger a single pulse sent to the wheelchair electronics, which executes the action as configured, for example, toggling the direction. The second special case we want to show is how to add a sip and puff to your head control setup. First, mount the sip and puff on the head control and connect the jacks. Then, return to the calibration menu via the onboard configurator, select the input jack, and you will see that the system has already recognized the sip and puff. Follow the wizard to configure the sip and puff for either driving directions or other functionalities. You can also set the maximum pressure for the sip and the puff in a similar way to how we calibrated the minimum and maximum force for the different pads. Ask the end user to sip and puff in a comfortable and repeatable manner. While they do this, long press the menu button to save the values. In this commonly used example configuration, the side pads are used for head positioning. The back pad is used for driving forward, and the sip and puff is used for driving left and right proportionally. In a third special case, you can add an extra dedicated button to control functions like standby, backward driving, or the menu. To configure this, simply plug in the button, return to the calibration menu, and navigate to the jack setting. From there, you can assign the desired function to the button. You can also assign two functions to a single button using short and long press actions. Navigate to the Settings submenu and select the input jack. Set the direct action to none. This is important because the direct action always takes priority over short and long presses. Once that's done, you can assign your desired actions to both the short and long press. To distinguish between a short and a long press, you need to set the short timer. If the input is closed for a time shorter than the short timer, the short press action will be executed as soon as the input is released. After installing the device, start by performing a few tests without anyone sitting in the wheelchair, so before the setup is delivered or put into service. Check that everything is intact. Look over the housing, the cables, and all connectors to make sure nothing is bent or damaged. Then press and release the different parts. Once released, the device should be in a neutral state. Next, activate the wheelchair's operating system for an operational test. Make sure to do this only on a level surface, with at least 1 meter of free space around the wheelchair. Press each pad slowly until you hear the parking brakes release, then let go immediately. Repeat this for all pads and all satellites mounted on the head control. Also, check that the power, on, off, and mode switch are working properly. Finally, sit in the wheelchair yourself and perform a drive and stop test. Make sure all functions work correctly in every position the user might use the head control and the switches. Also check that no cables or parts can get damaged or obstructed in any possible position of the wheelchair. Then drive at full speed and shut down the wheelchair using the power on/off switch. The wheelchair must stop safely and in a way that does not endanger the user. During the first use by the end user, we recommend that the dealer or service engineer assists and explains the different possibilities to both the user and their attendant. It's important that the customer fully understands the installation, how to use the head control, and what can be adjusted to optimize their experience. Have the user try out all positions and functions of the device and make any final adjustments if needed. Make sure to draw the user's attention to the fact that the device should never be covered or blocked, as this could cause the mo-vis head control or the wheelchair to behave unpredictably. Also explain that a functional test is required after a warning, an error, or any incident involving the wheelchair or the mo-vis device. Under regular circumstances of use, the device and different parts do not require a lot of maintenance. We recommend to schedule a full checkup of the wheelchair and its operating systems by a qualified service engineer once a year. On a monthly basis, clean all parts of the device as dust and dirt could lead to reduced functionality. While doing that, check if all bolts and screws are still firmly tightened. See if there is no damage to any wiring and no excessive wear to any of the parts. We also advise to change the cushions of the central and 2 lateral pads when worn. Therefore, first remove the current cushion using a flat screwdriver. To put the new one back in, insert it first in one side and then push down on the other side until you hear it click. Cushions are available as spare parts at mo-vis. There are 2 types of error messages: a warning or an error. A warning can usually be resolved quite easily, while an error might indicate a more serious issue, in the worst case requiring the device to be sent back to mo-vis. When a fault occurs, a description will appear on the screen. It will show either warning or error, along with a number. If the beeps are enabled, you will also hear a corresponding number of beeps. A common example is error code 0822 or 0824, which indicates an issue with the left or right input jack, respectively. The system is unable to detect the input type, so first check that the cable is not damaged, is still functional, and is properly plugged into the jack. Most of the time, this will resolve the error. If not, check if you've connected the correct input type and if the onboard configurator is set up accordingly. You can find an overview of all warning and error codes in the installation manual. We hope the assembly and configuration of the head control goes quickly and easily after watching this video. You can find all product information and additional installation manuals on our website. Please contact your dealer in case of technical problems. If your dealer isn't available or unknown, you can contact mo-vis by telephone or email. Always state the product code and device serial number to ensure you are provided with the correct information.